Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Himla Soodyall, the Executive Officer at the Academy of Science for South Africa. I wish to extend a hearty welcome to one and all who have joined us thus far, and I'm sure that number would grow. I am pleased that I have been asked to represent the joint group of the Academy, the Department of Science and Innovation, and the National Research Foundation to be the focal point representative for South Africa, celebrating this year's International Year of Basic Science and Sustainable Development. As many of you would know, this program was officially launched on the 8th of June, but there have been many activities ongoing during the course of this year. And today, the joint triad of the DSI, ASSAf, and NRF wishes to launch the South African arm of the celebration of activities that have been packaged in celebrating the basic sciences, including, of course, issues related to sustainable development. And as I've mentioned, there have been many forerunner programs already, and we are heartened that many stakeholders, schools, and different other institutions have already lobbied and come to the party in support of this. So today we are very happy to welcome an esteemed cast of scholars who are going to share with us their insights on and views as to how the basic sciences have been portrayed in their immediate environments, coupled with how this will impact on us achieving some of the sustainable developments, SDG goals rather. So without further ado, I want to welcome one and all. We have had over 1,000 people who have registered for this event, and let's see as we progress how many people join us. We are now at around 240. But I would now like to take this opportunity of welcoming Mr. Imran Patel. Imran is the Deputy Director General for Research Development Support at the Department of Science and Innovation. And the department has been supporting us throughout in the build up to this roundtable, but also as the precursor prior to the launch by UNESCO on the 8th of June. So Imran, welcome. And I'd like for you to make some opening remarks to get us going. Over to you.
Thanks, Himla, and welcome to the 200 odd, and hopefully more will join as we start the program for what looks like a very inspirational and informative session this afternoon. I just want to make 2 points because I saw that there's only a few minutes for this welcome remark. One is this celebration of the International Year of Basic Sciences and our particular effort comes on the back of work that DSI has been doing with system players to lift the profile of the basic sciences. That started a few years back when it was identified that there's a need for a specific framework to enhance the basic sciences. We continue to do this and to look at how we can support the basic sciences, even in the context of looking at how the existing NSI can support some of our critical challenges. So that basic sciences framework is in place, and we are informed by some of the scientometric work, etc., in terms of where we need to invest. And hopefully this year will also allow us to really focus on that question about how we deploy our scarce resources to areas of the basic sciences that can support our other efforts. So that's the first comment. The second is that in the decadal plan, the basic sciences continues to be prioritized with the view that there are a whole set of areas in the basic sciences space where if we are able to strengthen it, we're able to support some of our economic objectives. A good example in my former space of work was in material sciences, where we were doing needed to do quite fundamental work around powder metallurgy, etc., which fed into our program on additive manufacturing. So finding those links, so both the support of the basic sciences, but also finding the support for the basic sciences that can be integrated more effectively into these broader strategies of areas we want to develop competitive and comparative advantages are things that we're looking forward to supporting over the next decade. So on that basis, I look forward to the lineup of speakers and some of the insights that they will be sharing with us on the critical role of the basic sciences. Thanks, Himla.
Thanks, Imran, and thanks for emphasizing that the DSI does have a basic sciences platform initiative. And I want to also acknowledge upfront the collaboration and support that we've had from Danny Adams and Segrin Moodley as we have been working, and Tandeka as well, as we've worked through in collaboration with the Basic Sciences Platform of South Africa to build on this particular initiative. So thank you very much for raising those points. Colleagues, it's now my great privilege to introduce our plenary speaker, who's Professor Jonathan Jansen. He is, of course, a friend, a colleague, and also the president at ASSAf. Jonathan is a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University, and as I've mentioned, the president of the Academy of Science of South Africa. He holds some of the most esteemed accolades nationally and internationally in this regard, including honorary degrees from the University of Edinburgh, the University of Vermont, and Cleveland State University. Other details of his industrious and outstanding career is in the attachment with a biographical sketch of speakers. But I just wanted to say how inspirational it is to have him as our president, because he challenges us to think out of the box. And I was particularly inspired by his continued investment in scholarship, in the building of the next generation of academics in this country, the way in which he writes in his weekly Times magazine without holding the shots and punches. But all of this comes because he sits at a point of knowledge and based on evidence. And because of that, I think we will be, I'm sure we are going to be inspired by what he has to say about interdisciplinarity between the basic sciences and the social sciences and humanities in advancing the Sustainable Development Goals. So Jonathan, we look forward to listening to what you have to say, and thank you ever so much once again for agreeing to participate and giving us your time to share some of your insights on this topic. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor Soodyall, Himla, and for that generous introduction. Let me say the obvious, that the Academy of Science of South Africa, ASSAf, fully supports the celebration and indeed the recognition of the basic sciences in this International Year of Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development. I'm not going to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals because, like all of those kinds of goals set by multilateral agencies, they're basically a waste of time. I've written about this over the years. You know, it's meant to spur action on the part of countries, especially developing countries, but it has no theory of action to make those things happen, even with the enticement of funds. So I'm certainly not going to go there unless you want me to be a parrot and speak about things that clearly are not achievable. But I do believe very firmly in the basic sciences and their importance in development broadly. Secondly, I have to say that the case for the basic sciences has not been convincingly made inside, but especially outside of the community of scientists. And so in preparing for today, I called prominent scientists around the country, including Himla, and said, what is the case for the basic sciences? You know, if I went into the public of generally well-educated people and I said to them, what is the case of the basic sciences? They wouldn't know, because we haven't made that case, and so on. So while I appreciate the International Year of Basic Sciences, you really have to get your marketing together. You really have to get your messaging together, because I don't think the average well-educated South African understands or cares to understand what the role of the basic sciences are in, let alone in sustainable development. This, of course, is an important step in that direction, but I have a strong feeling we are preaching to the choir and that we need to take this message much more broadly in different kinds of media to the science public for reasons that will become clear in a minute. By way of encouragement, and also to connect to the theme, let me share something I heard recently about the potency of the basic sciences in laying the foundations for our capacity to deal with things like the pandemic. I was a speaker at the International Conference on Chemistry Education recently here in Cape Town, and one of the speakers, Betty Davidovich, shared this slide, which I just want to read to you. COVID-19 had changed our lives in a profound way. Chemistry has played a major role in the pandemic, e.g. the PCR test. And then she cites a beautiful section from the press release on the occasion of Kerry Mullis being the joint winner of the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1993 for what? The invention of the polymerase chain reaction, PCR. This is what the Nobel press release says. The applications of Mullins's PCR method are already many. It is, for example, possible using simple equipment to multiply a given DNA segment from a complicated genetic material millions of times in a few hours, which is of very great significance for biochemical and genetic research. The method offers new possibilities, particularly in medical diagnostics, and is used, for example, for discovering HIV virus or faulty genes in hereditary diseases. Researchers can also produce DNA from animals that became extinct millions of years ago by using the PCR method on fossil material, end of the quote. At that point, 1993, none of us actually thought of PCR tests and its value, its enormous value in the context of COVID-19. And that for me is such a powerful example of why the basic sciences matter, because without them, the applications that follow would be pretty meaningless. What, however, have we learned about science, truth, and the public since the pandemic? And what do those learnings mean for the basic as well as the applied sciences? First, we learned about the power of science to intervene in what was, in effect, an existential crisis. It still boggles the mind of the average person like myself that what normally would take years and years to develop, which is a vaccine for a particular malady, we literally did within months of producing more than one vaccine. In fact, that was able to save the lives of millions of people who would otherwise have died. That power of science is also its beauty. It's also its value. It's also its very basic science contributions to our ability to survive as a species. And we must never forget the blessing of science in the context of this horrific, once-in-a-century pandemic. Second, we learned about the reality of scientific dispute among leading scientists. Now, leave aside the crazies for the moment. That is not the focus of this particular talk. And this, I would argue, was good for science, for reasons I'll explain in a minute. So when you saw the heated debates, fallouts, discussions, resignations, in the context of South Africa, at least, with that command council of the president, I was quite happy to see that, because it destroyed a myth about science as being exact, precise, consensual, evidence-based. I have friends who swear by the particular methodology, they call it the gold standard, by which they do experiments in so-called evidence-based medicine. But all of that is a bit of a hoax, not unimportant, not without value, but a bit of a hoax, because it covers up the fact that within the science community on almost any subject, just as in anthropology, just as in sociology, just as in educational studies, scientists fight. Scientists are human. Scientists have egos. Scientists are like all of us. And I was not at all perturbed, certainly on the South African scene, by seeing those pitch battles in and outside the laboratories, because that is how science is. And let me give you a very good example of this. I won't mention their names, but I am quite sure that the South Africans on this on this line would, with an ear for music, would be able to know who these two men are. Now, I've got two very good friends. Both are eminent scientists on a world stage. They are both A1 rated scientists in the estimation of South Africa's National Research Foundation. The one is a world famous vaccinologist. The other is a world famous infectious diseases expert. But both of them have completely different views on the finer reading of things, like the cause of the pandemic and the wait time necessary for isolation. Both of those issues, as you can imagine, are life-threatening and indeed life-changing if you mishandle those kinds of events. So I sent both of these two friends of mine emails at the same time on these two questions. Because I'm working with a research team on the impact of COVID on academic research and teaching and administration in South Africa, I wanted to know from these two scientists what one calls the current period. Is it post-pandemic? Clearly it isn't. Is it, what do you call this period that we're in right now, 2022? So I wrote to them, because I'm a social scientist, I'm not a medical scientist, and I wanted to know how to label this period. The one said, we are at the tail end of the pandemic. In other words, the pandemic is almost over. It's running out of steam. The other on the same day said, we are still at the height of the pandemic. The pandemic isn't over. In fact, there might be another wave of infections coming. Both of them, eminent scientists, both of them, each one of them, giving me a very different reading on how to label the current period. Then a friend of mine came from Stanford University via Australia, and she got COVID and was in a Cape Town hotel. And she said, you know, just given the different variants operating in different parts of the world, could you get me a scientific, you know, opinion on what I should do? So I wrote to the two friends again on the same morning. The one said, you will stay and must stay in your hotel for 7 days just to be safe. This is the one world famous scientist. The other one said, go outside, enjoy the fresh air, get out there and go on with your life. And take within that context, take the necessary precautions when you're close to people and so on and so forth. Now, both of these men are right, of course, within the frames of interpretation that science allows. But how science was communicated during much of the pandemic was to convey to the ordinary person a sense of science as an exact science. Little was said, except in public displays of conflict, that the medical and indeed the basic sciences are emotional, political, personal, conflictual, as part of the very essence of science. Nor was there a sense of humility about what we do not know. What the public heard was, get vaccinated and you will not get hospitalized and you will not die. That's what the public heard. What was not stated clearly and repeatedly was that you could get hospitalized and that you could in fact die despite vaccination. That lack of certainty, that shortage of humility, that need to convey and indeed display expertise cost science dearly with middle groups such as the vaccine hesitant at the height of the crisis. Few scientists made it clear in the early years of the pandemic that at that stage, we simply did not know enough to be clear about any kind of evidence on, for example, transmission. Long after it was discovered that COVID-19 as a disease was caused by an airborne virus that affects the respiratory system, we were still washing our hands and our groceries religiously. At this very time, populist leaders such as Donald Trump and others saw the opportunity to make fun of science and scientists by proposing all kinds of quackery as they kicked up dust around science, truth, and the public trust. The third lesson, therefore, is for science to develop a strong sense of humility in the presentation of scientific truth to broader publics. And the fourth lesson, about which I've spoken and written before, is that science recognized far too late that the pandemic was not simply a biomedical problem, but profoundly a social, economic, and indeed political problem. For a long time, expert panels, certainly in South Africa, consisted of epidemiologists and infectious diseases experts, without social scientists, such as sociologists and anthropologists, and economists as being part of the deliberations on how, for example, to mitigate the effects of COVID. This we have tried to argue, for example, in a series of writings under the provocative question, this need for an interdisciplinary science. we used the question to banner a special issue of the South African Journal of Science, myself written with Shabir Mahdi. How to do social distancing in a shack? Now, of course, the question is ironic, right? Because you can't do social distancing in a shack. But what the scientists couldn't see, the medical scientists, is that even to talk about social distancing in a poor country in which people lived on top of each other through no fault of their own in shacks, that the very concept of social distancing was a joke. In fact, made no sense whatsoever. But it took a long time for the medical scientists to understand that what you needed in that room was social scientists, particularly those dealing with sociologies of space, to realize that you need a much smarter approach, an interdisciplinary approach, to dealing with the issue of the living conditions of people in the shadow of the pandemic. The fourth lesson, therefore, is about the need for a stronger interdisciplinary approach to pandemics, and indeed every other social and scientific problem, whether it be climate science or human migration, for the world does not come to us in the form of disciplines.
Wow, I guess taking a sip of coffee marked the end of what was like a melody of thought-provoking ideas being fixed into our brains. Thanks very, very much, Jonathan, for a very insightful presentation. And I absolutely love the way you bring the real life, the reality of scenarios into the dialogue of how we as academics or scientists, policymakers, or whatever stakeholder avenue we represent, to consider some of the issues that plague us in how we communicate this science to the public at large. I promise the audience that you will not mince your words and say it as it is. And yes, I mean, hopefully some of the other presentations will articulate and maybe convince you that no matter how we address the Sustainable Development Goals, that whatever we do contributes in some way of that intersectionality of addressing the livelihoods of people at large, and that we can still use science to beef up the energy of what we do in terms of what we want to accomplish. So, I mean, I'm as I said, I'm always in awe of how you take a topic, you bring real life scenarios, your examples of having to engage with the world-class scientists, and how opinions differ, and that there is room in science to have differing views. But what is the message that goes out to the public, who are obviously the people to whom we want our science to be a benefit to? So thank you very, very much. I'm sure you will stay with us for the rest of the deliberations. And we don't have a question and answer session just yet. Nevertheless, I now want to change a little bit of the program, where I would love to invite our Vice President of ASSAf Council, Professor Stephanie Burton, who is also the President of the Royal Society of South Africa and represents the University of Pretoria. And ASSAf is really making her work very hard today, because she's already had to moderate a session on science leadership that we had earlier this morning. Professor Burton is an accomplished scientist, full of wise comments in directing the way in which we utilize science at various levels, because her dynamic career has had intersectionality with many, many things. And so, Professor Burton, I now hand over to you to moderate the next session with our three panelists. And I am sure that at the end, when we have the Q&A, there will be opportunities for bringing in our audience to contribute to this session as well. So over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much. And may I just say, by word of introduction to what we are going to hear now, that I am delighted that Professor Jansen mentioned the PCR reaction and the basic science which underpin that. And as an introduction to our next speaker, let me just say that by 2023, the basic science of the PCR reaction will have led to a business which is worth more than 10 billion American dollars. Because of the innovation and the commercialization and utilization of that basic discovery of the Taq polymerase and further ahead, the chain reaction itself. So our first speaker, who is is Dr. Sudesh Sivarasu, is going to speak about the use of basic sciences to accelerate innovation to achieve the SDGs. Dr. Sivarasu is a professor of biochemical engineering. He isn't just a scientist, he is very much an innovative scientist, and he has a sparkling record of having built up a portfolio of many patents and brought to business, brought to the real world, brought to real life some of the discoveries that have changed our lives and have changed the way in which people enjoy healthcare. So I won't say much more than that now, except that Dr. Sivarasu is also a member of the South African Young Academy of Sciences, which is one of our flagship activities within the Academy. So thank you, Dr. Sivarasu. We're really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Prof. Burton. Can you just confirm if my slides are visible?
Yes, they are.
Okay, fantastic. So thank you to ASSAf and for organizing this session. And it's only a pleasure of mine to speak just after eminent speakers like Prof. Soodyall, Prof. Burton, and more importantly, Prof. Jansen. So I'm just my talk today is going to be briefly about using basic sciences to accelerate innovation. This is to achieve SDGs, more importantly. So let's, my introduction is given, ready. Just see if I can change my slides. Innovation is a keyword, and a lot of people use innovation, whether it's in the context of getting more funds or whether it's in the context of changing the world. The word buzzword innovation is quite often used and more often misused. And the reason why I'm saying that is because innovation can change the world, but also can actually, if not focused well, can actually be quite detrimental to its original purpose. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because 90% of all innovations fail, right? So this is quite a concerning figure if you look at why these 90% of innovations fail. And more importantly, if you look at the investment that goes into these innovations, what happens to them? And 90% of all the investments that goes in innovations fail. So which is quite a concerning figure. So if we move straightly into the next figure, which is even more concerning, which is about 90% of innovations in academia fails. 97% of innovations in academia fails, which is quite a significant number. And there is a clear we're not doing something right, and that is what is actually leading to these failures. And I would like to like our attention to be on the fact that even if we incrementally change these failure rates, if we can move up these 97% of innovation failures to about 85% of innovation failures, we will still change the world that we live in a significantly better manner. And that is what I would like to focus on in our next 15 minutes today. So there are many reasons to failure, and we have our own different perspectives of why these failures happen. One, of course, is the misaligned incentives. There's not very clear incentives for academic innovations, which kind of leads to a lot of failures. But on the other side, there is also a lack of preparation for in the academic world, and the lack of end user understanding. I'll speak a little bit more on the end user and understanding. And there is quite a bit of emphasis on technologies over actual solutions, and there is more emphasis on inventions over innovations. And there is a lack of understanding of the term innovation, but people tend to do more on inventions, not necessarily innovations. Where innovation is a holistic approach to changing systems. There is a lack of ecosystem for innovation ecosystem. There is a short-term mindset, and we as academics are always looking for something that will produce a paper in the next 6 months so that I could use it in my next cycle of review. So we are all very much in a short-term mindset. We're not focusing on something that could actually translate into the far end. And there is a lack of transparency on many things and how policies are made and how decisions relating to policies that could impact innovation translation are made and how that is impacting our day-to-day lives. So I want us to briefly look into a system where we are currently dealing with something like this, where there is no ecosystem. So in a place like when there is no ecosystem, I use this. This is one of my favorite slides because you can see here there are lots of vehicles. There are tuk-tuks, there are motor vehicles, there are motorcycles, tricycles, people walking on the floor, on the road. There are scooters, there are people who are setting up shops, all on across the road. And somebody is trying to take a U-turn in the middle of the road. This is exactly what is happening in our innovation ecosystem, in our basic sciences innovation ecosystem. We are doing things on our independent manner. We are doing everything on our own perspective. There is no coordinated effect, and there is very little coordination, which is actually leading to something more fruitful. And all of us here in this ecosystem can actually benefit. So this kind of analogy for the lack of ecosystem is only to emphasize that a more streamlined ecosystem where there is a pathway for tricycles, there is a pathway for tuk-tuks, there is a pathway for people to walk, there is a pathway for more cars to go, and let's remove the shops from the road. It's just a basic theoretical exercise. But if we can figure out what is our place in the innovation ecosystem as researchers, what is the role for biochemical engineers, what is the role for technologists, what is the role for clinical scientists, let's put them in perspective. And if we can actually create an ecosystem that changes from one to another or leads from one to another, this innovation ecosystem would actually make it more process efficient for all the stakeholders who are involved in this process. So I'm going to use my example, the field that I'm coming from, which is medical devices and health technologies. And the typical example one could see is the lack of appropriate medical devices or medical technologies in delivery of healthcare. You could see that 2 out of 3 people globally do not have access to medical devices or medical technologies. And if you look at it, there are very limited number of clinicians, and the only tool that could convert these clinicians to effectively manage the untreated population is by using health technology, and there is limited access to these health technologies. So medical devices, which is my field of research, we have very limited medical devices or appropriate medical devices. I'm emphasizing on the term appropriate medical technologies because it is quite important. We need to have context-specific technologies. We cannot have solutions that can work in the first world, needn't necessarily work in the rural environment, down in Galicia. So we need to make sure that our tech solutions are fit to the environment that they're going to be used for. So this is an approach that we use in my research laboratory, which has actually led to quite a number of successful innovations. It's called frugal biodesign. So essentially, the problems are identified. The innovations that requires innovations are identified at a clinical interaction platform, where the unmet clinical need is identified. And then subsequently, this unmet clinical need is built into a solution that can actually be converted into a medical device product. And then the IP side of it, the intellectual property side of it is managed, then a commercialization strategy is set out, and then we figure out who's going to pay for the solution, create public awareness, et cetera, et cetera. So this is a holistic view of involving the multiple stakeholders who may be involved in the whole innovation production cycle. But what is very important in this entire cycle is, I would like each one of you to think about who, if you were to innovate, who would you innovate the solution for? Would that be, so in the medical devices space, if you ask anyone who's, many people who design medical devices, they would automatically say that they would be designing for the patients. But and I would want you to think about in your respective fields, if you were to innovate, where would your innovations, or who would use your innovations? And many a times, this is one fundamental mistake that most of the innovators do, which makes their innovations doesn't fit into the market. So in terms of medical devices, the innovations are not necessarily for the though the patients can use it, the innovations are essentially around the clinicians or the healthcare service providing setup. Because unless the healthcare setup or the service clinician signs up on a medical device or a medical technology, you cannot allow that for usage on a patient. So this center of innovation is quite crucial in your domains of innovation to ensure that you innovate for the right kind of people to be used on a different end users. So to identify who's the center of your innovation is quite critical across the portfolio, whether it is medical innovation, whether it is aerospace engineering, etc. You need to figure out why you're doing or to whom you're doing the innovation that you're planning to do. And another important aspect that that one needs to factor in is that every innovation that we are looking into requires a translation vehicle. We cannot assume that a well-published paper is going to automatically convert into a solution or into a commercial product. We need to make sure that we actually have an innovation translation vehicle. And if we fail to create a translation vehicle, 99% of the times that translation vehicle is not going to be created by somebody else. So if we were to translate basic sciences into something more translational, we need to have an idea about what that translation vehicle is going to be, whether it is going to be a company, whether it is going to be an IP, whether it is going to be a licensing deal. All those are different aspects. Those are different vehicles. But you as basic scientists, researchers, we need to have that idea about what that translation vehicle is likely to be. I want to bring our attention to these quite critical life cycle overview of innovations, and we need to figure out that we have always been using the push mentality into creating innovations from our basic sciences perspective and pushing into the space that is actually not going to observe what we need. We need to create the pull mentality, or we need to harness the pull mentality from the industry or from the community and innovate around that pull mentality, which kind of has couple of difficult and a different challenge, completely different to that of academia, which is the chasm of innovation, the chasm which is essentially around the valleys of death. So when you were to translate a research and development product into a commercial solution, you cross through the valleys of death after significant TRLs. Like once you cross the TRL 3 or 4, you cross a valley of death, and subsequently when you go into commercialization, when you go into scaling, there is another valley of death. So if we were to industrialize innovations, we need to have a full life cycle idea of our innovations. And this, we need to understand the valleys of death and the inhibitors, which actually will reduce translation. So only if we overcome these valleys of death, we will be able to increase the translation, or we may be able to industrialize many of our innovations from basic sciences. So how do we go about it? We need to have a holistic understanding of full value chain perspective. We need to create this ecosystem of linkages and relationships across various role players, as you see from left to right. And we need to create additional skills, which are essentially the skills scarce that we currently see in South Africa, which is quite leading to quite a lot of unemployment. That's another thing that we need to address, and we need to actually be able to harness more advanced technologies so that we can bypass the advantages that the current industrialized nations have against by using more advanced technologies like additive manufacturing for in our medical devices space. But there could be other things in your respective domains. So we need to actually think about a solution that is scalable for innovation and innovation support. So I would want us to focus on this particular slide, which is quite an important thing because most of the basic fundamental research happens in the universities and doesn't necessarily get translated outside. And there is this TRL chasm between TRL 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And this is where we really need to focus our efforts into, because universities are good in creating fundamental innovations from basic sciences, but they don't actually get translated. So for us to create that change, we actually need to make sure that we understand this life cycle. Excuse me. We need to be speaking about innovation conversion challenges. So from the right to the left. So we need to figure out tangible solutions to augment current practices, and we have to have the right kind of an ecosystem to produce and right kind of tools to produce the solutions that we are looking for. And if we are able to understand from TRL 1 to 9, which is from left to right, and this challenge varies from domain to domain. In the medical devices sector, this challenge is of the steps. We have about 50 steps in between TRL 1 to 9. This may be different to your specific domain. So we need to figure out, the first step is to figuring out what those steps are in your respective domain. In my domain, it's 50 steps. In your domain, it can be 25 or 75. We need to figure that out. So that's one of the most important challenges that I see that our current basic scientists face with the lack of understanding of the entire life cycle. So our research, just by doing one simple, one small aspect of the innovation side, we are able to address these many SDGs by simply translating or simply understanding the whole innovation cycle, and to translating the or understanding the life cycles, we are able to translate close to about 6 to 7 SDGs of the 17 SDGs. But this is just a fundamental example. You could just go beyond this as well. So how do we break down these problems towards solutions? I think we fundamentally need a systems engineering approach. We need to have this. We need to have this problem-solving mentality, where we create an intentional innovation framework which focuses on translation, and we focus on advancing curiosity-driven innovations, where the fundamental of translation is seen as priority and not necessarily our traditional outputs. Then more importantly, I would say innovation demands freedom, and which is quite a difficult thing to ask in a very rigid system that we currently have. And we need to break these barriers in order for us to translate these our innovations. So I would want to ask this question to all of our researchers. Are we as researchers are ready for the fourth and subsequent fifth industrial revolution in our respective domains? Because what is lacking is our agility, and clearly there has been quite a bit of academic resistance or innovation resistance for adopting the changing of times, and that it's clearly evident that there is lack of agility in academic innovation space for translation of basic sciences. So how do we go about sustainable innovations? First and foremost, we need to look into agility. We definitely need to be agile about how we see innovations and how we can quickly innovate and translate solutions. And the subsequent one is a very cliche one, but I can't emphasize the benefits of it, because during the pandemic, when we were working on few protective equipments, it was clearly not the advanced manufacturing of the world that has assisted us. It was more the printing and fabrication kind of environment that actually assisted us, which is like a printing company that actually helped us in creating low-cost, sustainable personal protective equipments. So, we kind of need to focus on clear transdisciplinary research teams and creating these research teams. And it's absolutely okay to fail. We harness that it's okay to fail. And then, I say this as a joke to my team. If you fail, the worst thing that can happen is you will still get a dissertation or you can do a publication out of it. But the moment you succeed, it changes into a different, it changes and it can impact the livelihoods of a lot of our people. So with that, I would like to thank the opportunity for this talk on the innovation, and I can't emphasize enough that we need to have a full life cycle understanding of innovations. Only then we can actually translate innovations, and for us to accelerate innovations, let's put our efforts on understanding the whole ecosystem and creating innovation ecosystems, and that's the only way we can translate the space that we live in. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you so much, Sudesh. Every time I hear a talk which brings so many things to light, I write down some of the things the phrases that I hear, and I have just written down that phrase, intentional innovation frameworks, and I'm still thinking about it. But when we come to question times, maybe we can talk a little more about that. We move on now to the next talk, which is going to be given by Dr. Beverly de Mons from the National Research Foundation. Her title is Using Science to Inspire the Next Generation of Scientists. And Dr. de Mons is the Group Executive for Science Engagement at the National Research Foundation, where she has worked for a number of years promoting engagement, and she is well known for her enthusiasm for science and for bringing together networks, and her interaction with education systems has really been very productive. So, and that also, of course, through the South African Agency for Science and Technology Advancement, where she worked previously. So we are looking forward to hearing from her how to use science to inspire the next generation of scientists. Over to you, Beverly.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and good afternoon to all the colleagues out there, both the panel and also to the many people who have joined us this afternoon. We really do appreciate your time. As explained, I was asked to really just speak to inspiration of the next generation of scientists, and I think very much in our context of the International Year of Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development. So I'm going to try and do that as we go through. But I really just want to start at this point, because I like to think that when we have topics like this, it can so easily, and I know from an NRF point of view, run into a whole lot of quantitative slides about number of students and number of graduations, etc. But if we're going to talk about the next generation of scientists, to just put a face to this aspect of the basic sciences. And it's been particularly helpful that we've just come through Youth Month in June and Women's Month still in August. And if you're a follower of the NRF on social media, you would have found that these are real people. These are, I haven't taken these from some magazine or university newsletter. These are postgraduate students, supervisors, emerging researchers, young people within the system who have been funded by the NRF. And really, public funded research remains a critical asset in advancing the challenges we face as a society, and really the importance of an inclusive and diverse researcher workforce is essential and remains a priority if we are going to be responsible to society's goals. So I hope you're inspired by homegrown talent that we have. But in the context of Jonathan's introduction and his keynote address in the beginning, my thinking was really at the time in including this is that those young people do research in a context. And when Jonathan said the world doesn't come to you in disciplines, this is exactly what the slide says, that the world comes at those young students in challenges, in priorities, in natural phenomena going awry, in society exploding, as we have in most recent times, in pandemics.
Beverly, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but your slides are not moving on, and you aren't in the presentation mode. I wonder if that's the problem.
Oh, that's funny.
If you go to presentation mode.
Yeah, I thought I was on because I can see it quite clearly. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Perhaps unshare and share again.
Yeah, I think I will.
Dr. Demans, it's Renata here. If you can just share, and then we can direct you to where on your screen you should click. Have you started sharing again?
I thought so.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I pressed on the full screen on the share mode.
Can you see the slide show next to its home? It's currently under home, and then it says insert, draw, design, carry on to past, transitions, animations, right at the top of the toolbar. Higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
So click on that slideshow. Let's see what it does. Okay, and let's see, start from the beginning, go.
On my screen, I can see the whole slide. That's my problem.
Yeah, on our side, it's just showing, like once you've opened it, it is moving now. So if you click on the slide, it does move to the next one, but you actually have to click on the slide on the left-hand side.
So has it moved for you on your side?
Well, if you click on the side, just click on your slide 3. I just want to check again on your slide 3. Yeah, so maybe we shouldn't waste time and we just carry on like this. If everyone's happy, just click, every time on the slide that you need to be on. So currently we're on slide 3. I'm not sure what number slide you were on.
I was on 3. So
okay, all right.
You had seen this slide?
So that one, yes, and the next one.
So I was speaking about this particular slide in the sense that the world, Jonathan's sentence that I remembered about the world does not come to you in disciplines. And really, in this case, if you look just most recently, for our researcher workforce, and especially the postgraduate students, the challenges are coming out of the daily lives of our lived space. And whether it's physics or chemistry or mathematics or biology or any of these, the basic sciences really underpin our comprehension of these phenomena. And I think they provide a fundamental understanding of the world around us. And in navigating this world around us, the applications of the basic sciences are vital for advancing solutions in any of the areas of our live space, or the world as we know it, both natural phenomenon and other areas. So I think when we provide that human face to what is usually, when we talk as the NRF, when we talk about research for a better society, that is the face of research for a better society. The knowledge and the research are at the epicenter of, in this case, national development, but really talking to the context that where we need to bring about impact, and critical to this continued research for a better society will be for us, in the context of today's talk, the issue of transformation, not just transformation in terms of looking at race and gender, but also looking at the knowledge agenda in itself, in thinking about how we going to be able to navigate the interface as we go. From an NRF perspective, just to give some background very quickly, this whole given that we are talking about the next generation of scientists, we look very much at what we call a holistic approach. It's obviously not linear, but just in trying to talk about the approach that somebody coming in from undergrad thinking about a postgraduate career and a postgraduate start, at least to a possible future career, is that it is leading and looking towards excellence and towards making sure that we are moving in terms of both discipline and strategic focus, with underneath that also looking at all the different programs and the different interventions that are provided to make sure that that movement from one stage into the next as the career develops is actually supported quite significantly. So if I look at the first one, looking right at the start of that career journey, and focus on these next generation of researchers, is where the postgraduate students reside. And they're really at the initial stage of their researcher journey. And I'm not going to read through all of this, but those of you who know in terms of the postgraduate space, besides funding, and funding we will put at the top simply because that is really important. It is a number of other things that that journey is going to require: access to local and international infrastructure, local research groups, etc. All of those, just ending with the last one, in training our students in innovation-rich workplaces, connecting just to the previous speaker. And so you've got to look at this in terms of a real comprehensive and integrated system. In terms of the fact that we are looking at the Sustainable Development Goals and the basic scientists, I just had to look very quickly at looking at postgraduate students and looking at the areas, the knowledge areas in which they are funding. And these are rather just to show trends than ask you to actually focus on little numbers at the bottom as to what they, what they actually mean. So I suppose, first of all, if your accountant eye is on, you're going to look at the center and you're going to see, yes, the money has been decreased. You heard Imraan starting off right at the beginning of scarce resources, constrained resources, no different in the national funding system for postgraduate students from an NRF DSI perspective. But more than that, I wanted us to just have a look at just the areas which seem in the postgraduate space, considering the basic sciences, looking at the biological and chemical sciences, also linking to what we said, having the higher percentage at 26%, and yet the arts, humanities, and social sciences coming at the next higher level in terms of 20% of the total investment. The rest of the areas, agriculture, medical sciences, computational sciences, economics, all of those coming at lesser percentages, but showing that there is a spread in terms of the interest in terms of studies in these areas. And this just looks at last year, showing you that the areas in terms also of our equity approaches, if we look at the knowledge areas from that particular wheel, we will find that we are having, in terms of race and gender, you can look at the different areas like agriculture, arts, humanities, and social sciences, computer and information sciences, and then economics, really, having a percentage of students in there, and then looking at female participation in these various knowledge fields. And where would we be looking in terms of really just 60% participation, and the highest still being within the arts, humanities, and the social sciences. And so we continue to see the participation in terms of these basic scientists. And if you look at 2021 in terms of the science that's driving a workforce that inspires new people to enter into it and to gain experience in new disciplines and drive new ways of thinking, Black South African women constituted half the postgraduate students that received funding in the 2021 academic year, which is a growth of significant growth if we have a look at that. So of these, 81% of Black South Africans and 59% of women are all races, bringing us really to a situation which we find ourselves in 2022. And we are looking at in 2022, knowing that we've come now to a situation where we've introduced a new postgraduate student policy specifically to enhance the equality and equity in terms of access, success, and throughput. I think one of the things you will notice here is that the percentage funded by the NRF is relatively low in relation to the needs that are out there. So funding remains, by our own admission, top of the needs list if we are going to really bring in more people to build this particular force in areas, new areas, as well as the traditional areas that we have. Also, to improve this, as we said, equity, the system knows that we've introduced a new bursary setup where full cost of studies and partial cost of studies now become considerations. These are the kinds of stories that are told, not necessary to go through them, but really out there we have students innovating in new fields, moving in areas close to the Sustainable Development Goals, looking at food security, and really, especially in this case, female scientists moving forward. In terms of the emerging researchers, you would find, first of all, the quantum in the center starts to decrease once you get to the emerging researchers, but you do find that still you are having similar areas, as we know, simply because you're going from postgraduate into emergent researchers, showing the same kinds of patterns into the emerging researcher space. This space, needing still considerable thoughts around, besides funding, access to international networks, support for all kinds of research space and research time, and continued development into leadership. And we find that this area of development of the emerging researcher space into and movement into the researcher space is actually the interface where we need to have most attention at this particular space. You'll find these have just taken from our own internal, we have a national research infrastructure that provides a base for postgraduate students to develop and gain their inspiration to develop their expertise from really great research infrastructure that we have in the country, things like SALT and the SKA, but also in other areas in our sciences, and the diversity that comes through in terms of age, in terms of race, in terms of gender, in terms of disciplinary field is just amazing in seeing and listening to the stories of the young people that we have. I think if you have time, please go to the pages, because what has interested me beyond the numbers has been the stories of each of these young people in terms of saying just what inspired them. They are inspired by really so many things around them to get into their fields, but the fact that they also need this continual support to bring them to the other end of that continuum that I showed you. One of the areas where we as NRF are really moving in the engagement space is what we are looking at, and just recently developed an engaged research framework, an emphasis on responsible research and innovation, where this quadruple helix between science, society, government, industry, and even the fifth one on the environment itself, is that we really have to, especially from a transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary knowledge production space, we have to start to look at that in a much more intentional way, if we could use that word, in the sense that we want to be promoting the research that is really going to reinvigorate what we could call active citizenship, and pays attention to ethics and sustainability and relationship building, as opposed to the kind of research that ignores each of these kinds of areas across the life cycle of the research. It is a way of thinking through it, as we spoke about COVID-19 earlier on as well. I think we've seen in the last 2 years, especially at the height of the epidemic, the relationship between science and society being at such a critical juncture. Under all of those points that Jonathan mentioned, having both advantages for science, but also making very visible the glaring crevices in the interface between science and society. And so from an engaged research perspective, we want to go back to ensuring and inspiring the next generation of scientists to become scientists that are at the crux of the interface between science and society, that are taken into account, regardless of their discipline, the solutions that are required, and the solutions that are required not from a basic discipline on its own, but really about engaging across disciplines, within disciplines, and externally to the societies, both those that we serve and those by whom we are service. So I think we really are on finding that the young people who are at the stage where their sciences careers could be taking off, have opportunities to be inspired, and most of all, I find from their stories, wanting to make a difference. And I think for me that is key in the journey of the science career. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beverly. And again, many important ideas in that talk, and in particular, the ideas around active citizenship for scientists and the engagement of science with society and science for society. That links nicely with our next talk, and we'll come back to all of these questions when we've had this one, but I will try to link those two. But our next one also links clearly, because we now have a discussion on the public engagement of science. We have Dr. Ndishizeni Eric Maluta, who is the coordinator of the Vuwani Science Research Center at the University of Venda. He's also a council member for the South African Institute of Physics, and his interest is in physics teacher development, and he's a member of the International Commission on Physics Education. So he is, and obviously has a PhD in physics. His interest is on green energy, which of course is a very much a social issue. So we are looking forward very much to hearing what you have to say, Eric, and after that we'll link them up with some questions. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan, and good afternoon, colleagues, and everyone who has joined the talk. It's always nice to speak after the other speakers have said much of the basic science and what we need to do. But as said, I will be talking about public engagement of science. I will be looking at what we're doing currently at Vuwani Science Resource Center. I think I have to go to. Okay, I think I'm on slideshow now. Okay, Vuwani Science Resource Center, it's a center which is under the University of Venda, and one of its advantage is just in the middle of the community. It's sitting in the middle of community. It has been established in the year 2000, funded by the Zinex Foundation. And as a center which is seated next to the community, around the community, we have seen, or the university have seen, that there's a gap between science and society, the understanding between the science and society. And we are trying to bridge this gap by going to the rural communities and talk to them about science, engage them with several issues, starting from learners, early childhood, until the public at large. And saying that we have the gap, looking at this year when the world is celebrating the basic science for sustainable development. As a science center, we also have a mini documentation related to that, which it's already on YouTube, which is the Basic Science for Rural Sustainable Development, looking at what happened from the establishment of the electrons until now, the solar cells, and what is happening in the rural areas. Like to say, we engage the public, looking at the way where somewhere there's no grid lines, they can get electricity from the solar, and others, they can get water from the solar water pumping, which is why we have the mini documentation. But looking at what we do as a science center, looking at the engagement, we can define the public science engagement in different definitions. But as said, we realize that there's a gap where researchers or science people need to engage the public. But in rural areas, our main thing as a science center, what we want to do is to provide a science that are entertaining, interactive, hands-on, accessible, relevant, and understandable. The issue with science, especially science engagement, looking at learners' support, then the issue there is PT in rural areas. We still have learners who do not even know any scientific gadgets or any scientific related experiment which they do. One of my experiments this year when we're doing the Science Week engagement, we realized there are schools where learners don't even have any apparatus to understand anything what they are doing. And looking at engagement or public engagement of science from learners support, then that's really painful to look at that. That's why as a science center, we try to do that, to provide a science that's entertaining. But as we are just far from other people, then it means we're not reaching all the people. But our other main objectives are to promote learners to get inspired, create a venue for innovation, assist learners with extra help. But apart from the learners, what we do is also to look at on the community at large, where we do science awareness to the community. And the other thing we do is awareness on medicinal plants and vegetables currently, where we are engaging people to say that they need to relook at what was happening before, and can we go back to relook at some of the vegetables people were eating in those times. And those are some of the awareness we are doing as public engagement of science. And apart from that, looking at learners, we also support them from their curriculum and other activities which are related to that. The center importance, looking at what we want to do, what we are looking at is to improve the learning of, probably the learning of science, which is one of the main things, promote civic engagement, strengthening community through addressing their societal needs, and then we give platform to university researchers to interact with community on different research activities. As a physicist, then we also need to give other people in biology, other people in social sciences to engage with communities. And that's what the Science Center does. It's just a platform where we are saying an outreach program, either from scientists, from students, from whoever, then they can come to the center and engage with communities. And when we are engaging, we do several things. And those engagements are coming from several methods of what we do. And how we engage with the communities, we do different workshops with different collaborators we have. We do school support with experiments and outreach and in-house, where learners do come to the science centers, where we go to the schools, we do science exhibition. We also do or participate in the National Science Week. Then we, as indicated, as part of the South African Institute of Physics, we do teachers upgrading development, looking at what can be done in science. And when we're looking at the science, like we're looking at really all the basic science, starting from mathematics, chemistry, physics, and then we engage learners in science expo. We do early childhood workshop, science rallies, women in science, motivational talks and science exhibition, and then we do the public awareness. But then this all is achieved through the different facilities we have at the center. I will talk about the computer lab we have, which more engage the public where we are. As I've said that the center is in the rural area. What we do normally, we give the public chance to come and do the basic computer literacy. We have people who just have grade 10, some don't even have grade 10, but then we engage them, tell them to come and have understanding of at least what a Microsoft Word can do. And I'm happy to say, after engaging them, after having trained them, some of these people, some of these public participants, they normally get jobs at the shops. Some they get jobs like they become secretaries. But as a center, or as a people who are engaging them on different skills of sciences, we are saying we are happy to see them growing. We are happy to see these people getting something, because now when they get that simple certificate, it's making them to, at least at the end of the day, get some bread in their house. And as a science center and as a people engaging public in that rural areas, it makes us to have courage to say, this is one of the way to engage further rural people, to engage them so that at least they can manage to have future. Then we have exhibition hall where we do learner support issues, where we have learners coming. Some of these learners, they never saw any science equipment. Then they have a chance to come and touch them. They have a chance even to come and play with them, which is what we are doing to engage more of the rural learners. And we also do engage through research facilities. And this is where the energy issue comes from. This is where our climate change comes when we engage, or the climate change awareness when we engage the public, because the center is really in the middle of the communities. Communities do come and see those stations we have. Like we have the 4 stations where we have the weather station. The weather station is where we have people surrounding, and then we have a solar PV system station where it's just a comparison station between the two. And then we have a Edu tower and a 5 kilowatt solar plant. And these 4 stations, they really attract public to come and engage with us, especially now when we have the problem of load shedding. People are tending to go to solar. And as we are in the middle of the rural community, people are coming and engaging with us to understand what they can, how they can use the solar in their houses. And even some are even asking whether we can install the solar to them, which shows that as a center, the way we are really participating, or we are really hands-on on engaging with public. And the Edu tower, what we do is just to monitor the carbon around. And what we're saying is to try to motivate people not to burn the bushes, not to make fires. As we're saying, come and see some of the data we have to see what effect we are doing to the climate change. And this we have seen it's working with us when we're engaging public in these manners, and also looking forward to say, if the public are understanding this, then there will be a chance for them to change and mitigate climate change through other issues which they can do. But that's I've already said, we do learner support and outreach, and we have several collaborators. And this was one of the events which happened this year when we have the Nelson Mandela University coming up far north to do learner support, to engage with different learners from different schools. And when we have this, we have several other institutions coming with to help us, to assist on career, to assist on engaging with learners. Like here on the other photos, the top one, we have people from SANSA, we have people from ARC, we have people from UNISA, we have Nelson Mandela, we have Univen, and other several people coming to engage with learners. And engaging with learners with different direction, then it means we are saying these learners can try to be people who can follow the STEM careers in future. And this is the engagement. We take them further in other collaboration to other provinces, like to Mpumalanga, which is the nearest. We have collaboration with the Penridge Science Centers. We have Inkomazi mathematical science centers there. which we normally engage to say we engage with different learners to engage with different learners. And this is other things we are doing, engaging learners on motivational talks, engaging them with experiments. As I've already said, that there are different learners who even sometimes go to grade 12 and even pass and go to university without touching any physics or science equipment. And it's pity when they go there, when they are really participating with other people who has already seen some of these things. Apart from just learner support, we go to tribal offices sometimes to engage the parents and learners. And this is one of the events where we go to Mukura Tribal Council to engage the parents. And after engaging the parents, what we're doing was to introduce the coding, which is a simple coding which has been developed from Nelson Mandela University, where you don't need network, you can even do it on the ground. And we went there to really engage the community at large, to say, as parents, can you help us, can you assist us to see whether you can motivate your children to do science. And what we're doing was to introduce the robotic to the primary learners. If you look down there, there are some square drones, and we were trying to do coding on the ground, which is a simple coding developed at Nelson Mandela. And this is the way we are really trying to say, we are engaging the public. We are trying by all means to say, there are people there, the future of the country needs scientists, and that's what we are trying to do. And apart from the real science, we do the indigenous knowledge system. As I've said, currently we are focusing on the medicinal plants and herbs and vegetables which are around. And what we do at the Science Center, we normally engage learners to show them some of the herbs and some of the traditional medicine which were used before and which people are still using, but to indicate to them that really even our indigenous knowledge can be used, and this science has not to be lost. And we sometimes have the traditional knowledge holders coming together, engaging them to get the knowledge of what they are doing. And this is done because as a center, we are currently the Limpopo Indigenous Knowledge System Documentation Center Hub. And it's possible for us to engage the traditional knowledge holders, also the traditional healers and everybody to come together, and we discuss and also document their knowledge so that at least this knowledge can be used in future. And this is how we are engaging the traditional healers, traditional knowledge holders, and everybody who has some knowledge to say through communication or public communication of science and knowledge, we can try to have something which can be used in future. And this is the other things we are doing at the center, showing or illustrating that there are people who has knowledge, but for us not to lose this knowledge, then we are documenting that. And this is what more we do to the public, because it's easier to get more people buying in, because they can see that now you are also going to the traditional knowledge holders or traditional healers through the traditional tribal authorities. And this engagement also, it's more important for future scientists, especially those who are in botany, those who does medicinal issues, to be looking at this, because then the what we have documented can assist in future to the medicinal issues or to the issues of helping people. And as I've said that we have exhibit room, we do sometimes call the primary learners to come and engage them with different science activities. Like on the picture here, the black thing is just a model of a black body, which is now an astronomy research area. And then we engage them, illustrate what is happening there above us through the black body model. And on the other side, we do science show just to engage the learners around. Apart from that, we do support on social support, looking at different primary school, like because we are in the Limpopo, we don't have several things, but what we do is to try and engage learners to do astronomy, and they participate in astro quiz, and sometimes they get awarded. And those are the issues we are doing. And for ECD, we try to engage educators to understand the science behind, so that they can impart these to the children from early as 3 years to 6 years. And this is some of the workshop we do with the ECD educators, so that at least what they get from science, they can go back and impart the children as young as possible. These are the same activities. And we do women in science and career guidance. You can see this is the motivation talk we do for women, so that at least in future we have more women coming in science. We have more of the women in physics, especially like in physics, there are not lots of them. That's why we preach the women in science. And then we do public awareness on energy. And this is some of the public people who comes around, ask questions about energy issues. And sometimes we have workshop training them to understand the climate change and the renewable energy issues, since we are having different stations which are there in the science center. And
we're almost out of time. If you could just finish off.
Yeah, let me finish from this slide to say, apart from all that, we do collaboration with international and national facilities, and we do training on some of the things, which this is one of the training of a winter school where we have people from Germany, others from African country coming together and engaging students and public on different issues concerning issues on agriculture, issues on weather parameters, and other issues. And this is how we are engaging the public. I think for the sake of time, I will end there and say that really there are challenges and other issues related to public engagement, especially looking on rural areas. But then I think the public engagement of science from researchers, from all policymakers, we need to really continue engaging the public. I will end there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was an amazing exposition of all of the activities in a relatively small area, but obviously very far-reaching and very encouraging, from drones to coding to Indigenous knowledge on medicine. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Maluta. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have some time for questions, and you are invited to put your questions into the question and answer tab if you do have questions for any of our speakers. And we have a couple already, so perhaps I will just ask for our speakers to perhaps address those, and if you have others, please do put them into the question and answer. It's not the chat box, it's the Q&A box. One of the first is about the question, and perhaps Sudesh, you could start with this one, of how to involve social scientists and humanities experts in your innovation pipeline, or your I love it, intentional innovation framework. How do you work with social scientists?
Thanks, Prof. Burton, and to the person who has asked the question as well. So just, it's a very interesting question, because we kind of oversee the roles of social scientists in this whole innovation complex, because we always assume that innovation is pretty much technology oriented or science oriented and basic science oriented. The fundamental difference, what makes an innovation successful to not so successful one, is the adoption by human beings or adoption by a larger population. And that element is what the social scientists bring into play. So one key aspect that we could for sure factor is usability testing. All the devices would need to have some form or the other usability by the general public, who's going to be using these solutions, innovations, or going to be affected by the innovations. For us to understand the usability, it's quite difficult as a technology innovator to understand the usability, because you are going to look into the way to solve the problem. But a general public, when they have a look at your solution, they're going to do exactly the opposite of what you think they should do. So this is we always say this in our lab. We got to make the solutions idiot-proof. Essentially, you got to make it in such a way that even if you say left to right, left to right, left to right in all the explanations, but somebody else will always go from right to left, you still have to make sure that the solution is intuitive. The innovation is intuitive to use. And this is something, as scientists, we cannot get it right. And I'm very confident in saying that we cannot get it right, because I've made many solutions. I've thrown it, taken it out to the public, and it has been discarded because they saw it completely differently. And only the social scientists can actually add the appropriateness factor. We can bring in the technology appropriateness, but the social scientists will bring in the people appropriateness. And that's when these two work in hand, only then the solutions will be synchronous.
Thank you. And perhaps a question which came up earlier for Beverly, Dr. de Mons, the question of social responsibility and ethics and research integrity. How do you think we involve communities in those ideas and get those ideas into the heads of aspiring scientists?
No. Thanks. I think this is one of the areas of real growth and training that is required. Within the social sciences, I do think this is an area that's way more advanced in terms of working with communities, action-oriented research. And so the ways of working have long been in practice. That's not to say that the ways of working are always ethically correct. We have many examples of communities really not happy to be used as samples or to be used as survey material without any ethical recognition for the processes that need to be followed. So I do think I know, give the ethical responsibilities to the universities through your ethics committees to make sure that things are in line for student proposals. But we've also seen where things can go awry, because it is not something that can be presumed to be you know how to do this, or you should know how to do this. I think just like Sudesh is saying, from his perspective, that innovation should just go, that device should just go from left to right. And it's not, as straightforward as that, because there are alternate views and there are alternative experiences that have to be taken into account. So I think we have to pay much more attention to this, and especially more so for the people in the natural sciences, physics domains, the engineering domains. We have almost had carte blanche when it comes to the science lab, because you own the lab, you almost own the students as well, you own the budget, and so you are in control. But if you're really going to be forced more and more to look at the type of challenges we face and to involve communities, and communities don't, and that's my thing as well, communities don't only mean an informal settlement outside of the university gate or a poor community, you know, in area X. The policymakers are your communities as well. Scientists outside your discipline are also another community. And so our notion of community, I think, is also something that has to change. So I really do think that we have more conversations that need to be held around this very important area, especially around ethics. Yeah.
Thank you. And we have questions coming in thick and fast, but Beverly, there have been a couple, and if maybe you have a short answer. The question of funding for research, funding for science, and the fact that it seems to be inadequate.
It is inadequate to us, and it makes the difference. I mean, you can't get into the university, can't get into the program if you don't have the funding. The funding can come through a bursary. But we do know in systems where there is inadequate funding, the equity issues remain not met. You really, it's, you know, we can't go around the fact that we can't say that just,
I didn't forget you. I'm working on that.
Yeah, we can't say it doesn't matter if there isn't funding. We've got to really continue to work. I know as the NRF, you saw the stats that we've produced funding really just 35% of eligible students. Besides the fact that there's no money, extra new money in the government purse, it means we have to go out and find that money. I think in much the same way that universities are doing, simply because it is an essential part. And so I can understand in a system that doesn't have as much money, that it's going to continue to be a real struggle. Yeah, because the research costs.
Yeah. Sure, of course, yeah. Let's switch to a couple of questions for Dr. Maluta. Particularly, there's a question about how you identify and select traditional healers or those with Indigenous knowledge to invite them to work with you. And then there's also a question also for you, Dr. Maluta, about how you measure the impacts of the work that you are doing, all these different projects in your community. How do you measure the impact of all of that?
Okay, maybe to start with the last one of the impact. What we are normally doing, looking at the impact, we are looking at the different, especially on learner support, we are looking at the learners who have passed through the centers and looking at them, how far do they go with science, engineering, and technology career at the higher institutes of learning. And when we engage the public on energy issues, well, the impact we are looking at is to see whether these people, are they even one or two people after engagement currently who goes and use the solar as the solution to their load shedding. And those are the things we are currently doing, but we have not yet finalized our impact measurements. On the issue of traditional knowledge holders and healers, we don't invite by looking at who the people are. We just invite everybody. Anyone who feel like he has knowledge holder, anyone who feel like it's a traditional healer, we just invite everybody to come and engage with us.
It's interesting, and here's a question which I'm not sure who would like to start, but possibly all three of you could answer from your own angles. So let's go with this one. This is about science education. And one of the questions was that, one of the comments was that children at school are put off by the way in which science and maths are taught. And then there's another comment here about science education, which starts at the foundation level, and yet the science content is very limited at that stage. And foundation phase teachers don't have very much science background. And the result is that there's a period of time when children are very curious, but they don't get the kind of science education that could inspire them. Who would like to start? Dr. Maluta, would you start? But I am going to ask our other two speakers to comment about education at school as well. Dr. Maluta? You're muted if you're speaking. I think we might have lost him. Well, let's see if Dr. Maluta comes back, but perhaps Dr. de Mons, you'd like to talk a little bit about your views on education at school?
Yeah.
Just a view.
Yeah, the view is, well, just it's interesting that the stories of the PhD students, the lecturers, the postdocs, beyond the pipeline in the university, their inspiration started with their science and biology teachers in almost every story, and also their subject choices, and whether or not these were aligned with the sciences. So we can see how that fundamental science education environment affects, has effects long down the line. I really don't think it's adequate at the moment. And I think, that the training of teachers, the content knowledge, and changes to the way in which we teach as well, still have to continue. What we do in terms of our own science engagement as NRF is try to support the science system. So that's how we get scientists into the science system, to teach teachers, to teach science debate, to teach science communication to learners. But we are not the main providers of the education content. That's through the Department of Basic Education.
Of course, of course.
Yeah. So I do think that we have a role to play, but it's a real systemic issue in terms of science in the education system. Yeah.
And hi, you're back. Go ahead, Dr. Maluta. Sorry, I think we lost you for a minute.
Okay. Now I think the issue of the education is not even the problem with South Africa only. As I sit in the International Physics Education Committee, it's a worldwide thing. But what we're doing, coming back to South Africa, in the South Africa Institute of Physics, looking at the FET band, we normally engage the educators to try and understand what they're teaching by having people from the universities explaining the content of that. But as the last speaker was saying, the more of this thing is under the basic education portfolio, and that's where things need to start from.
Thank you. And Dr. Sivarasu, I want to ask you, I know that your topic was not about education or development of scientists, but I would like to ask your views on how to inspire school children and youngsters to get into science and innovation.
Thank you very much, Prof. Burton. So it's a absolutely essential aspect of what we are doing, because we want to inspire the pipeline that's going to be coming and doing the kind of innovative work that's happening in our lab. If we were to factor that, if you want to have a sustainable lab pipeline of innovations, we need to make sure that we inspire the right kind of people coming in. So I think it also has to be, like, if I mentioned in my slide, curiosity-driven innovation, because the school children, we find them to be extremely curious about all the various aspects of innovation, and we in our institutes, in our centers, we have facilities where the school centers students can come and visit, but that's only a very small portion of students who get exposed to these kind of innovations. And even that small portion is sufficient to trigger a chain reaction of more and more. We get more and more queries for such visits to happen. At a time, we have about 100 students visit, and they go through the whole innovation process. They see the various innovations. They get excited. They go back to their teachers, ask them how to get involved in this kind of thing, or what to do to become an innovator in future, what to do to become a coding specialist in future. That triggers their curiosity. And I think that as basic scientists, it becomes our responsibility to proactively engage with the community, especially the learners, so that we can actually have a pipeline of students who are curiosity driven to come into higher education. Subsequently, it is also, I think it's one of the more important aspects. I think I'm going to wear my SciAS hat here, and SciAS does a few initiatives around reaching out to learners and to make it more relevant for the community of learners, and to making it more bite-sized, so that people at the learning age group can actually understand things better. So one of the things that we in our SciAS group is about science communication, where we specifically target about the modality that will be more relevant for our next generation learners, especially the Gen Z learners. So, we were talking about it even in the early this week in our SciAS meeting in Western Cape, where we were talking about potentially including TikTok videos as scientists, like TikTok scientists, basically explaining science through TikTok videos, because that is more accessible and more appreciated by the Gen Z students. And we have to change the way in which we deliver science, and in the way in which we teach technology, the way in which we teach fundamental science, and which means, I kind of go back to my slides again. We have a huge innovation resistance from our traditional way of learning, and we need to break that chasm and move on to break that innovation resistance, to first innovate the way in which we can actually make ourselves more approachable or more relevant in science communication for the next generation learners. And that again needs to be intentional.
So there you have it. We have had talks which have covered innovation and inspiration. And here we are. I think we have run out of time and we can't answer all of the questions, but there is a statement which I'll just read to finish, and that is that the relationship between teachers and academics is a catalyst to sustainable development in our communities. I think we've seen a very wide range of possibilities in the three talks that we've had, and of course in the previous ones, Professor Jansen's and Imran's as well. So thank you to all the speakers, and I hand over now back to Professor Soodyall just to close off the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Stephanie, for guiding and moderating the session. We have really been inspired by the breadth of the conversations that we've had with each and every speaker. And I also want to take this opportunity to once again congratulate Dr. Eric Maluta for winning the NSTF award for science communication. And colleagues, I'm sure you will add your voice of congratulations, seeing what he is doing in a rural environment to inspire young learners. So heartiest congratulations to you, sir. Bev, thanks again for bringing into perspective the sorts of equity bandwidth that is necessary in this space, and really sharing with us the reality of the science base and the various things that we have to deal with. And Sudesh, once again, your inspiration in terms of bringing to the fore that space for early career scientists like the one you co-chair for SciAS, the South African Young Academy of Science, and also bringing the relevance of how you put things all together. Really, really great. And it's all the presentations spoke to how we utilize science in this space. Unfortunately, Professor Jansen had internet connectivity and got dropped off, and he sends his apologies that he shouldn't be but he wasn't available to be here in the question and answer session. So I bring that to you as well. Then just shifting a little gear, I also want to add the apology from Dr. Aldo Strubel, the Executive Director, Strategy Planning and Partnerships at the NRF. We had requested him to add some closing comments. And then just this morning, he informed me that he was unable to attend, and he passed that task on to his colleague, Dr. Beverly Damons. So over to you, Bev, to give us a few closing comments.
Thank you, Himla. Thank you very much. I just first of all just want to reiterate our thanks. I think this has been a very good conversation, bringing us back to center almost, as it were, in terms of the basic sciences. But from an NRF perspective, really just to reinforce the criticality of the basic sciences, and that the central role that they will continue to play within the NRF, and the NRF support for these areas going forward. As was said earlier, we need to continue to identify the areas of the basic sciences where we need to provide the support to build the areas, especially those who are going to allow us to meet very specific goals that the system has for itself. It all goes without saying also that we'd like to reinforce the notion of transdisciplinarity. I think that has come out so clearly today, that it's not one discipline that is going to provide the answers to many of our challenges. But we're not there yet as a system, and as the NRF, we also have to think about actually ways and means of promoting this much more than we have. Transformation imperatives remain a top priority, I think, for all of us, I think for the system as well. And then again, the research impact. I think we've been looking as a system much more closely at the impact of the research that we fund. And then the notion that I said of engaged research, I think it remains really, really key. And as Aldo would have said, had he been here, I think he would have spoken most strongly for the need for partnerships to drive continued advancement of the science agenda, and in this case, the science agenda for support for the basic sciences. And he asked me just to alert you to the fact that the NRF and MRC's future member for South Africa to the Human Frontier Sciences Program, which will be formalized by the end of the year, will serve as an important platform for advancing discovery and basic sciences. So we continue to drive this, and I think that bodes well for the future. So thank you very much, and I wish you well for the rest of the celebrations of the International Year of Basic Sciences for Sustainable Development.
Thanks very much, Bev, for those poignant points. I have noted them because I think these are critical in us reporting when we do at the end. If I could just ask Renata to share the closing slide with respect to a way forward. Renata, could you please put up that slide? So while she's doing that, I also want to, in absence, really give my heartfelt thanks to my colleague, Ina Smith, who has been assisting me throughout this process of bringing this program together jointly on behalf of the DSI, ASSAf, and the NRF. Renata, have you got my slide for me?
Imla, Renata will post it now. She's just having difficulties.
Okay, well, it doesn't matter if we can't do that immediately. I'll just read it off for you. We have engaged in this alliance to put together outreach and soundbite why the need for us to be involved in this particular national or annual event, or the International Year of Basic Science and Sustainable Development. We want to engage with schools, with science centers, universities, etc. We have engaged many stakeholders, and every single one of them will be hosting particular activities during the course of the year. And we'd like, as Bev has stated, to promote partnerships between the various participating sectors like schools, universities, and business, so that we could co-create and strengthen the activities of each other. And we want to find ways in which we can engage the public to demonstrate how the importance of basic science and to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Professor Jansen, in his opening remarks, kind of said, well, why now the SDGs? Well, this has been in place for quite some time. South Africa is contributing to this via various portals, with a strong component built into the structure of the Department of Science and Innovation, as well as Stats South Africa. We report this to the necessary authorities. But whether we're doing it for the sake of reporting, I think it is a fundamental way of us contributing in whichever little way that we can to ensure that we make the world a better place for every single one of us to be in. We are living in a time with global challenges manifesting in several ways. I mean, just in this country, when you listen to the unemployment statistics, to the inflation rates, etc., we are living in very challenging times. And so there's a huge responsibility of us in the sciences to utilize whatever skill sets, whatever mechanisms we have of working together in this collaborative way to contribute and to assist in whichever way we can to kind of make our environments and our lives better going forward. So we do have a website that has been created, and you can see it highlighted now on the slide. So please, colleagues, look at it, because we report on activities that are ongoing there. We're also going to be part of the Rwanda conference in Africa, and that's scheduled for May of next year. So look out for announcements coming up in that way. And INA is driving a very exciting competition for schools, where schools can participate and tell us what is it that they are doing in the promotion of basic sciences, etc. So colleagues, just to sum all of this up in a final closing statement, our website is there. We are here to provide whatever information you may have missed. We are broadcasting this live on Facebook, and so at the end of it, it will be available for you to look at it. Somebody had put in the questions whether the slides will be available. I will ask my colleague to ask the various speakers who have had slides if they are willing to share that, and then we will share that with you. So it is our future, and we all need to do our little bit to make it happen. And then don't forget that the Department of Science and Innovation does have a platform for the advancement of the South African basic sciences. Dr. Seglin Woodley and Dr. Danny Adams, who are on the call as part of the audience, together with Tandeka Hellis, are driving that initiative. And we implore all of you to join us as we celebrate this international year. And I want to just make one final announcement that we as South Africa are hosting the World Science Forum at the end of this year in December. And that is being led by the Department of Science and Innovation. So please support the initiative, because this year's World Science Forum is replacing our usual SA Forum on Science. So we hope to see you there, and we look forward to your engagement in celebrating this particular year. And at the end of it all, my colleagues and I will put together a report that we will submit to see how we have celebrated the year. So last, I want to thank all the speakers for giving us their time, sharing their intellect with us, challenging us to think out of the box in some instances. And with that, colleagues, I wish to bring this meeting to a close and thank all participants for for giving us 2 hours to share in the launch of the South African arm of the International Year Basic Science and Sustainable Development. Go well, be safe, and enjoy the rest of your evening.